And so to me, I was this here 6-7-year-old girl and introduced to this whole sexual world that I didn't understand. Really, middle school and high school is when my fascination with just anything remotely kind of like sexual, with movies and TV shows and books and stuff like that. We would separate into assemblies where the guys were taught, don't watch pornography, and the girls were taught, don't be the reason why guys want to watch pornography. That was a little bit for me. I was like, okay, so women don't struggle with sexual addiction, only guys do. And so it led into, honestly, a little bit more of my insecurities of like, there's something broken with me. And so for a while once I started exploring this area and being like, okay, no, women do struggle with this. We ended up having sex, even though I didn't want to. I know now that is considered date rape. Honestly, I kind of thought that I was going to struggle with it forever. I didn't really think sobriety was even an option. Like in my Christian mind, I was like, oh, this is just the Christian battle, is like trying as hard as I can for as long as I can, knowing I'm just going to fall back into it at some point.
Shh. Don't tell anyone. Has anyone ever said that to you? Did you feel the weight of carrying that secret? Maybe it was as trivial as a surprise birthday party, or perhaps it was more serious than that. What was it like when you were finally able to tell that secret, or when that secret was finally revealed? Did you feel the weight of that secret being lifted? Now, think about your own secrets. You know, the things that you swore you would never tell anyone. Maybe it's something hurtful that you said, or maybe it's more serious than that. Maybe it's something that you continue to act out to this day. Is it heavy? Do you wish that there was a safe place to tell that secret? Do you wish there could be healing in the revealing? What if that statement is true? What if there could be healing by simply revealing the secrets in my life? Could confession bring healing and change to my life? Could telling my secrets actually be the first step to change? Today, our guest is going to be very transparent about her story, and I want you to take note of how it has changed her life. I'm Eric Hutchinson, and this is the If Nothing Changes podcast. So, hey, friend, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners?
So I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ, and I celebrate recovery over a sexual addiction, and I still struggle with lust, body image issues, and codependency. And my name is Julia.
Hi, Julia. Well, thanks again for joining me today.
Absolutely.
I'm so excited to hear your story. I think I've heard it before, but I don't remember the details. So I'm really excited to get into it a little bit. So why don't you tell us a little bit about where you were born and raised, and a little bit about your childhood?
Okay. Yeah. So I was actually born and raised in Florida, Orlando, Florida. I was born there and just grew up in Florida life, going to the beach all the time. And then, I moved to Arkansas when I was 10.
Yeah. So do you have any siblings?
Yes. So I was the baby of 3. So I have an older brother and a middle sister, and then me. So we're all a year and a half apart. So my brother's like 3 years older than me. Okay.
So why don't you tell me a little bit about the dynamic between you, your siblings, and your parents? I mean, what was it like growing up in your home as a child?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in our family, I grew up in a Christian home. My mom and dad came from a bit of dysfunctional families themselves, a little bit. And they became Christians and raised us in a Christian family. But I don't know how much they were able to start tackling some of their family of origin issues. And so it definitely bled into our family dynamic. But they just loved us so much. We were in church every Sunday. And my brother and sister and I think my brother and I were probably closer when I was younger. My sister and I are probably a lot closer now that I'm older. But I get along great with both of them. And so, it was definitely kind of like a stereotypical like Southern Christian home, growing up in Florida, and very loving. But there were just, with every family, just dynamics that happened. And
So did you have a coming to Jesus moment as a child, or did that come later?
Yes. So, well, this is good because this leads into kind of the roots of my sexual addiction is actually. And so so the background of me accepting Christ kind of starts with, I had a neighborhood friend who we were really close, lived in the neighborhood, and we were over at each other's house all the time. Whenever I was around 6 or 7. And she, from going over to her house all the time and sleepovers, I don't remember all the details of how this originated, but basically, I don't know if she taught me this or if we stumbled into, I don't remember all the details, but there was, I think of it as she taught me like how to masturbate, but she never touched me that I remember. And so I didn't realize at the time that that was still considered abuse. And so to me, I was this 6, 7-year-old girl and introduced to this whole sexual world that I didn't understand. And that actually started a sexual addiction of masturbation. And it's sitting here now, it's like, I think back to that and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I didn't realize just how young and innocent I was. Like there's so many adults who can't even overcome a sexual addiction. Here I am, 6 years old. I have no idea this whole sexual world and what it means or what it is or what it's used for or how to overcome this. And there's like a compulsion to keep doing it and why, and like all this different stuff. And my parents, who were just so loving, I didn't bring them into it at all. I was very scared. And there was I probably felt a bit of emotional unsafety with them. So I didn't bring them into it. And so I was very alone and isolated. So this led to, I'm so grateful to them and for my church and growing up in a Christian home, because I had so much influence of Bible and Christian music and Christian friends and like a huge Christian influence to where my sister and I shared a room and we'd listen to music at night, and it was always like Christian radio. Well, the song Above All by Michael W. Smith came on. Love Michael W. Smith. And gosh, I just started weeping as a 6, 7-year-old, just laying in bed. And there was something about that song that just hit me. It was like the total explanation of the gospel. Like the lyrics say, trampled like a rose, he took the fall and thought of me above all. And I think at that point, even though I didn't really understand what was going on with me, I knew like in this, child brain, this is bad. I can't stop doing it. There's something wrong with me. Why can't I stop? But then realizing like, okay, I understood, like to use a big Christian word, my depravity in that way, like there's something wrong here. There's some sort of disconnect. And then it was like, oh wait, but then Jesus came and took that and then he overcame it. And now I have eternal life. Like it just clicked in my brain. I just started weeping. And my sister called my parents in and they came in and they said, what's wrong? And I didn't have any words. I was just like, I'm sad. I don't remember what I said, but I think that was actually my moment of conversion. I think it clicked in my mind. And like my pastor today, I didn't really think about that. My pastor of my church and at Fellowship Fayetteville mentioned like there's actually we think of like accepting Christ as a prayer. That's just how we do it in the modern age. But he said, when you look at scripture and people accepting Christ, how little, like, it's not like Jesus is like, hey, do that. The thief on the cross was like, he said, do you believe you'll be with me in paradise? And so yeah, that's kind of the backstory of accepting Christ. And so it was really beautiful, even early on, just thinking about like, I had this horrible thing that was like introduced and not understanding and isolation and everything, but that led to such a beautiful moment of salvation. And I think a lot of times we can downplay the role of the Holy Spirit in someone's life in the moment of conversion, like the indwelling of the Holy Spirit and how that changes a human. And so I can just see once that clicked for me of being like, I think that was my moment of salvation, because I had always been like, I don't know when it was. Once that clicked, I could see there was a definite change of like a stronger level of conviction, a desire to read scripture and more, there was definitely just a change of a change in me. And so, yes, love it.
So I have a question.
Yes.
You have thrown a huge amount of information out so early in the interview. I'm just amazed that at 6 years old that you were dealing with things that, I mean, many don't deal with until they're an adult. And so did you have a concept at 6 years old that what you were doing did you feel like what you were doing was wrong? You said that, this friend introduced you to this and that, you guys were doing this. And so did you feel like what you were doing was wrong? Was it just something that you did for fun, recreation, and you didn't really have a sense of, oh my gosh, I shouldn't be doing this? It doesn't sound like you came out and told your parents about it. And so what was that like for you as a 6-year-old? Did you have guilt feelings or shame feelings after you would do these things, or what was your concept of what you were doing? What did you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was overrun by guilt. And I think the biggest thing was just confusion as well. Like I was just very confused. I didn't know what this was or what, why I felt like compulsion for it, or what the deeper, now as an adult, I'm like, I know so much of like physical intimacy starts with emotional intimacy. And if that's like, it's actually very complex, sexual addiction is. And so in my rudimentary brain, I had no idea. But yeah, I was overrun by guilt. I actually remember, in my, Baptist church, every week, I don't remember at what point this was, maybe before salvation, or I think I was already saved. I think this is after my moment of salvation, but I kept going up to the front they had the altar call, and I kept going up like every week. And my parents finally, they pulled me behind the stage with one of the elders to talk to me. And they said, Julia keeps coming up here. I don't know. And of course they had no idea what was going on with me, but I was just so overrun by guilt. And I thought, okay, I'm a Christian. Why isn't this going away? I think a lot of times we can think that even as adults, but the elder, to his credit, he was so sweet. He might have been a deacon. I forget he's probably a deacon, but he put a cap, a pen cap in his hand. And he said, can you try to take this out of my hand? Of course, I couldn't pull this little pen cap out of his hand.
Right.
And, he said he used the verse, I can't remember where it's found now, but there's nothing that can pluck you from my hand, Jesus saying to us. And so he used that to say, like, once you're accepted into Christ, like nothing that you can do, nothing's going to be able to take this salvation from you. And I remember that so specifically, of that time. And so I think it is kind of sad though, thinking back to it, just thinking about me going to do an altar call was just a symptom of just this little 7-year-old overrun by guilt, and like, I'm sad for her thinking about, where she was at emotionally in that spot.
So did you keep all of that secret? What did you talk about with your friend? Did you guys talk about this at all? Did you say, hey, I'm still doing this? Are you still doing this? And did you guys talk about this is so much fun, or we shouldn't be doing it? Is it a secret? What did you guys talk about?
It's so funny. I think about that all the time. There's so much of it I can't remember, but I think it was like, from what I remember, and who knows how it actually was, from what I remember, it was kind of like we were both aware of our parents didn't know when we would spend the night is when it would kind of come out. During the day, we wouldn't really like think about it or talk about it. It would just be normal kids playing. And Lord knows what was going on in her family, and did someone introduce that to her? Was there some grooming? Just really sad to think about what was going on. Did she tell anyone? Like, what is she dealing with today? I don't know. And it is sad that I would like more clarity with it and stuff like that. And I've been a little bit frustrated that like, I can't remember all the details, but sometimes that happens,
So did your parents ever have the birds and bees conversation with you? Did you kind of make a connection there at all when that happened? So I was like 9 when my dad sat me down and said, hey, we're going to talk about this. How'd that go with you?
Yeah. So anytime at church or home or anyone would talk about sex, I remember being so intrigued. I was like, please someone give me some answers. And so I remember, so we did, I don't know if you've heard of Passport to Purity. It was
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that is very, like early 2000s, like Family Life. And so we did that. I think that I was, I want to say I was in middle school or high school. I can't remember the exact, it was late in life. I mean, at this point, my sexual addiction had been going on for years. And so, but yeah, that was kind of the official kind of like talk about it. I remember in my church, we had, we were going through some sort of like curriculum in my like women, like female small group. And we talked about sex. And so there was snippets here or there. But I mean, I went to like a public school. I remember like here or there, people would say jokes or make comments and I kind of trying to piece it together. But yeah, it was definitely a lot later than maybe I needed it. I think there's been more of a push lately of like, we need to start talking to kids about this early. And this happened kind of before that big push came, unfortunately. Sorry, Mom and Dad. But
Well, I was just curious because I know that, for me, I had already, by the time my dad had already talked to me, I already knew how things worked, the birds and the bees and all of that kind of thing. And so it was kind of like, yeah, I know, Dad, thanks, But so let's move on. So we got quickly into some heavy stuff, but let's move into, so what did it at all do anything to your self-esteem? So let's say you go into, so now you're going into elementary school and the junior high. So in your elementary school years, so were you a shy person or were you outgoing? And what did you think about yourself?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. So I think what's interesting and shows the power of the Lord is just like, I think that my conversion kind of affected me more than my sexual addiction at that point, which is awesome. Like, I think I became I had a high level of conviction and I kind of saw situations a little bit more like black and white and like, this is right and this is wrong. I think a lot of kids are like that. But I remember being... well, let me back up. So, and some of this is like, I've been in recovery for like 8 years now, and there's always like another level of like layer of things that I'm realizing. And so like my self-esteem is kind of a new area that I'm exploring and like going back to my childhood and figuring out, what did I think about myself when I was young? What do I think about myself now? And a lot of times I don't want to think about it because I'm like, I don't want to know the answer. But it's been good to start exploring. And I think, one of the earliest memories I have actually, even before my sexual addiction, whenever I was like 3 or 4, is trying to learn, or I guess, when do you start learning the alphabet? I must have been 4 or 5. So I was homeschooled at that time, and my mom was trying to teach me the alphabet. And I wasn't getting it for whatever reason. And I just remember feeling I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough. And I think that unfortunately I got some of that from my mom as well. And I don't think she meant to or realized what she was doing. But I think that what she was probably communicating to me was, you're not good enough. And so I took that, and once I came into public school, it was 2nd grade when I started going to public school, I already came in feeling behind, feeling not good enough. I think I was in some of the special classes for like reading. And so I carried that for a long time. And so all that to say, I came in with this huge insecurity about how smart I was. And then what I started to notice was the things that teachers valued in me were my ability to kind of see things black and white, or my work ethic, or being like a quote unquote good kid, or having the answers. And so I remember in maybe 4th grade, I was selected to be what they termed like a mediator. And so it was like what they saw in me, how I interpret it was like, they see in me an ability to mediate issues between my peers or something. That's what it was. And so I started finding my value. That was when like kind of the first like compulsions came along, which Rodney says all the time, he's the ministry leader in Celebrate Recovery, how compulsions are our head trying to do the work of our heart. And so I can see having a sexual addiction for so young, that was kind of the first addictive kind of compulsive thing. And I can see now how I had a bunch of different kind of compulsive behaviors of like finding someone found something in me valuable and I just run 110% at that thing. And so being a people pleaser to teachers or authority figures and different stuff like that, because I'm like, oh, they find me valuable in this way. I just ran and found my whole identity in that until I didn't. And then it went to the next thing. And so anyway, that was a very long answer to my self-esteem. But yeah, in the early years, I think that's what was going on with me.
So let me ask you this. So it seems like what you're saying is that you had a low self-esteem, or you did not think high of yourself. And to compensate for that, it was performance that
Yes.
you would go and you would try to do all these things to receive the accolades or to receive the approval that
Yeah.
you desired. Is that
Yes.
an accurate statement?
Yeah.
Okay. So as you're moving forward into through going junior high, high school, and adolescence and so forth. So are you still struggling with the sexual addiction? And this is a private thing that really no one else knows about. Were you still friends with the girl that introduced you to all this stuff all through this time or not?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, we moved to Arkansas when I was 10. So my friend was in Florida. So I guess it was from like 6 to 10 that this was going on and still having that friend. But at this point, even when I moved, it was already set in as like a personal habit. It wasn't, at first it was just like something that we would do together. And then this became like a personal thing. And so the roots were there. But yeah, my sexual addiction just continued. And again, I didn't bring anyone into it actually until I got into Celebrate Recovery, which was in college. But yeah, so what was going on for me in middle school and high school and all that was just kind of this hidden thing. But what started playing out of my sexual addiction in middle school, high school, was a fascination with, and again, I didn't realize what was happening to me, a fascination with romantic movies or comedies or books and different stuff like that. Any sort of, I know now that it was a fascination with some sort of love story where there's like the guy who's just obsessed with the girl, would do anything for her and all this different stuff. And that was just a playing out of, I know I said before that, physical intimacy starts with emotional intimacy. And so what I was truly craving this whole time was to feel seen and known and heard and loved. And I think that there was a little bit of emotional neglect that I had as a child that I was craving that. And so anything that remotely resembled, whether it was like a false sense of it in these rom-coms or just whatever it was, or a real sense of it from like teachers or that's what my heart wanted. And so I ran to those things. And so really middle school and high school is when my fascination with just anything remotely kind of like sexual with movies and TV shows and books and stuff like that.
So were you allowed to watch rated R movies whenever you were, as you got into junior high and high school? I mean, was that something that you had a conversation with your parents about, or was it just in your TV that you, absorbed? Or
yeah, well, unfortunately there's so much content and like, just like the more innocent movies or what it is. What's interesting is and this might be getting into the differences between men and women struggling with sexual addiction, but I think that there's some truth here for both men and women. But I realized that it wasn't even necessarily like the explicit sexual content, like sexual scenes or anything like that. A lot of it had to do with the storyline of, which makes sense, right? It's like, even pornography is telling ourselves a narrative. Oh, like I could get this person to love me. This type of attractive person would like me, or unconditional love here, unconditional. And so like a narrative of it is still the same type of thing. And so I was able to kind of explore sexual fantasies within the context of narrative, and then my brain would just kind of like take it away, if that makes sense.
So you did watch movies that were inappropriate or whatever. So when would you say your first contact with pornography was? Was that pretty young, or did it become, was it ever an issue?
No, that's good. So one of the cool things, and I think I've talked to a couple women who are like this, pornography never got crazy for me. Like there was, here or there, a few kind of like videos or things, but I think that there was just a huge level of protection that I had in my family. Thank God that I never got into any sort of like even softcore or hardcore pornography. It kind of just played out. It's very interesting. It kind of played out in just the normal content that I was watching. But yeah, and so it's interesting. And I think it goes to show too of just like the underlying roots of sexual addiction. And I think it's a little bit more common with women to be able to act out with masturbation without some sort of like pornography or different stuff like that. It's very interesting.
Well, it's more of my take on it is that for women, it's more of an emotional connection. And for men, it's more of a physical connection. And the visual for men, myself included, would be the images or, seeing those things are the arousal or that's where it is for men. And for women, at least from what I understand, is more of the emotional. And you mentioned, the romantic comedies or the men pursuing the woman, and that you're more interested in the storyline and how that a person is pursuing either you or you put yourself in that place, and man, they love me, they want me, they desire me. And that's more of a thing than for like myself or for men. It would be more like, I just want to see nudity. I just want to see the nakedness, and that's what gets me excited. And so, is that an accurate?
Yeah, no, it's super good. It's so interesting to explore the area of sexual addiction within men and women, how it plays out. And for a while, this is my own trauma response, because I used to think I'm just being a female struggling with it, especially like in high school. I went to a private Christian high school, and we would separate into assemblies where the guys were taught, don't watch pornography. And the girls were taught, don't be the reason why guys want to watch pornography. And it was horrible. And so like I always felt triggered, and that was a little bit for me. I was like, okay, so women don't struggle with sexual addiction, only guys do. And so it led into honestly a little bit more of my insecurities of like, there's something broken with me. And so for a while once I started exploring this area and being like, okay, no, women do struggle with this. For a while I was like, there's no differences between men and women in this area, and we all struggle in the same way. And then like, now that I've worked through things, I'm like, there's very much differences in this area. And so it is really interesting to explore. And like I was listening to a podcast, they were talking about in the context of like marriage and leading into sex and what it means for men and what it means to women. And they were saying so often women want to just like start and talk about like, hey, men, bring me into where you're at emotionally, talk about it, go there with me. And guys kind of get stuck, and they're like, well, I need some time. Like, what if it, but that actually happens for women when it comes to sex as well, where it's like, woman, okay, let's go. I need this, do this now. Like, and then we get stuck in how they talked about how, for men, the physical intimacy leading into sex, that actually is kind of a door into their emotional life. So like starting there and then going, and it opens up the door for like, okay, now I can talk about emotions and different stuff like that. And so, and then it's almost flipped for women. So it's just so interesting. And yeah, I think men are so much more visual. Anyway, we could talk forever about this. But
no, it's really good. And I'm curious about, how I've talked to men all the time about sexual addiction. And so it's interesting. And I appreciate the fact that you're being so forthcoming and transparent about your feelings about that, because that's just really good. So let's move back to your story. And so as we get into high school, and when was your first boyfriend? When did you start getting into relationships with the opposite sex?
Yes. I remember having small boyfriends like in second grade and fifth grade, but kind of my real, first boyfriend was probably, was it 6th or 7th grade? His name was Connor. He's out there. Hi. But yeah, was interesting. This is so funny now that I think about it in this context, but, of course I say flippantly all the time, like every guy struggles with sexual addiction, but not everyone does. But, it came up in our relationship that he struggled with masturbation, and like he wasn't like the first person that I told. Like, I think I had kind of told at this point some of my peers, who actually were women and also struggled. So that was like really good for me to hear. None of us knew how to get out of it, but we were more open about it, which is huge. But I remember telling him, or I think he maybe confided in me, and I said, oh, I struggle with that too. And so it was really interesting. But you know, we both went to a private Christian school. We didn't get that much into, he was my first kiss, but we didn't get into anything crazy in terms of like crossing too many boundaries, which was good. But yeah.
So let me ask you this question. Yeah. So did your secret, sin or your secret addiction, did that come into making it easier for you to cross boundaries later in your relationships or not?
Yeah, I think, and again, it goes into what we talked about with self-esteem as well. And so I think that it was one of those things where it was easier for me to cross boundaries if I thought someone wants me, whether it's emotionally or physically or anything like that. And so I think it was easier. Now, I did have just a crazy level of conviction, which is so helpful, just from growing up in probably a little bit too much at certain times. But and so I think that kept me grounded. I think that kept me very grounded through my whole sexual addiction. Like, it really would have ran away with me if I didn't have some sort of spiritual conviction for this is what's right, this is what's wrong. And so even though my emotion and my body and my heart wanted to run this way with me and go down a bad path, my mind would still, in some instances, say, no, this isn't good. Until I got to college, really. It did kind of run away with me a bit, but...
Okay, so you mentioned college, and apparently there's a shift there. So let's get, you graduated high school. Where did you go to college? Did you go out of state? Did you stay where you were? I mean, where did you go to college? And then let's talk about a little bit about your college life.
Yeah, at this point I was in Little Rock, Arkansas. So we moved from Florida to Little Rock when I was 10. So I'd lived there. And then when I went to college, I went to the University of Arkansas up here in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And so, which was great. I loved my college experience, but it did, it went from like 0 to 100 in terms of like freedom, and I could just do anything. And I think that, growing up where people kind of grow up with you, they have an identity to attach to you. And so once I got out of that identity, I could kind of make my identity whatever. And I was dealing with a lot of self-esteem stuff. Like, I was extreme dieting in high school. And so like I had lost a ton of weight and went to college, and then guys found me attractive. And so that started a whole thing of, it almost didn't matter who it was. If they were giving me attention, I wanted to keep that. Again, it's another compulsive behavior of like, okay, there's something here that I'm not addressing, and this feels good. This feels right, even though it's not. I got into, I was a University of Arkansas lifeguard at their rec center. And so that's where all of my friends came. And almost none of them were Christians. It was just, a completely different culture, which is great. I love them so dearly. But it was, now there were these guys who aren't Christians. Everyone's not a Christian nominally, and they all have all sorts of different types of beliefs, and they have different like standards for themselves, and they weren't trying to live out any sort of Christian life. Anyway, there was one guy that was a lifeguard that I started finding me attractive, or just like started texting me and different stuff like that. And we ended up, long story short, I was at his house, and I didn't want to, my Christian Baptist young ways, like I didn't want to have sex before marriage. And we were drinking and doing drugs at that point, and which again gets into more of my codependency of just like, I would do anything to keep these friends. Anyway, so that night we ended up having sex, even though I didn't want to. I know now that is considered date rape. And so that was kind of a very abrupt kind of change from the way I was like brought up and just my life then. And it felt really, honestly, I kind of numbed out about it. I didn't really address how I felt emotionally about it. I just kind of shoved it down and continued on. And it wasn't until I got to that was my freshman year. It wasn't until I got to my sophomore year where I found Fellowship Fayetteville. Well, there wasn't Fellowship Fayetteville, it was Fellowship Bible Church in Rogers up here, and got involved in their college ministry. And that's when I started surrounding myself with Christian friends. And then it was like all these awesome Christian people who share my values found me valuable. And that was actually huge for my self-esteem. I don't think I realized that was what was happening at the time. But anyway, that's a very long answer.
Well, let me ask you this, because I've talked about this with several other guests as well. So we have a thing in recovery we call love and relationship addiction, which and that's a little bit different than, we're talking about sexual addiction, but when we talk about love and relationship addiction, that we are so addicted to the feeling of acceptance and that someone likes me and pursues me, and I'll do anything to get that. I mean, is that a proper description of kind of how you were feeling? Would you have classified yourself? I mean,
yes, my therapist asked me the same thing. Yeah. I think there's definitely a huge aspect of that as well that plays into it. It's funny how similar, like the overlap a little bit between sexual addiction and love and relationship addiction. But yeah, I think that's definitely there.
Yeah. So that's interesting to me, because I've talked to men and women that have that. Addiction is like, I just want that relationship of that person approving of me and liking me, and I'm going to do what I need to do. And sometimes that bleeds over into addiction. Sexual activity or whatever, but I'm doing it for the other person's acceptance and whatever. So
yeah, totally.
So anyway, that's interesting. Okay. So it sounds to me like in college, and I know the listeners don't have a visual of how old you are. So you're still in your 20s?
Oh, yes. So I just turned 30 this year.
30,
so
okay.
Barely made it 30.
Oh, man, you are so young. So anyway, it sounds to me like the college time frame there, that there were some things going on that was leading you to, realizing that there's issues, there's problems and so forth. So why don't you... So I know that you're involved in Celebrate Recovery now. Why don't you lead me the events that led you into realizing that, you know what, maybe I need to start talking about these secret things that I've got going on.
Yeah. So I was actually getting involved at Fellowship Bible Church in Rogers. That led me to Celebrate Recovery, because I found a group of college friends there. And that's when I met Andy, who's now my husband. And he just started as a resident / he had like a part-time residency / on staff with Celebrate Recovery for the students, which we call the Landing. And so he needed someone to help run audio for him. And so I was like, I always wanted to learn this. And so I jumped in and started helping him. Well, it didn't take long after that for me to, I've been in church for years. I'm like, small groups with younger women. Like, yes, sign me up. Let's do it. And so like, to me, it was just like another kind of way I can serve in the church. And that's like, I love doing stuff like that. And so jumped into the Landing and started helping lead the small groups. Well, then it didn't take long after that for me to jump into a 12-step recovery group.
So let me stop you real quick. So the Landing, just for the listeners to know, that's basically Celebrate Recovery for youth, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We call it pre-covery. But they're also struggling with tons of stuff. So, but yeah, so I jumped into a 12-step, study. And, that's when, cause at this point my sexual addiction had been just this thing that I kind of knew was wrong, knew other women struggled with it. It's pretty common, felt bad about it, but couldn't stop. Honestly, I kind of thought that I was going to struggle with it forever. I didn't really think sobriety was even an option. Like in my Christian mind, I was like, oh, this is just the Christian battle, is like trying as hard as I can for as long as I can, knowing I'm just going to fall back into it at some point, which is so sad. And that's not how it is. And so it was actually, I was in my step study, and it was actually on Valentine's Day. Andy and I had just started dating, and he was fairly new to recovery, but he had been in CR for maybe, over a year. Anyway, he reluctantly told me, he said, yeah, I have, maybe like a year of recovery. And like, I know now that he was like embellishing a little bit because he was so embarrassed. He thought that wasn't a long time. But what was so funny is like, I was sitting there just looking at him, and I was struck by a different truth, which was sobriety. Like, I had never thought that was like, I was like, you mean that there is sobriety from this? Like, I don't have to return to it ever again. And so that has always just been, that is honestly my sobriety date of being like, oh my goodness, like I can have recovery from this. And so that was 8 years ago now that I've been free from acting out with masturbation. And so that was huge. And so I finished my step study and got into Celebrate Recovery more and started helping, and now the Lord's just bringing up all sorts of stuff.
So it's really amazing, and I just taught on this. I taught on the Ready lesson at Celebrate Recovery. It's funny how the enemy comes in and says, you're always going to be this way.
Yeah.
And you can't change who you are. It's your destiny to be this way. And that just, promotes further down the rabbit hole. It just further the addiction and say, well, yeah, I might as well just give in because I'm always going to be this way. Isn't that?
Yeah, it's a brilliant tactic of the enemy because it's a level of hopelessness. Like, don't even try. You're just going to be like this forever. And it sets in, and we believe that. And I think in every area that I've struggled with this, and I think it's true for everyone, like every new area that the Lord brings up, there's a level of that where I'm like, I have to overcome oh gosh, like, this doesn't have to be how I live. Like it's weird how we kind of do settle into that. Like, this is just how it's going to be forever. And like having to believe that there is hope out first and then taking the other steps. So interesting.
So when did you, we always talk about reaching our low or reaching a point where, we start to turn. Was that the turning point for you whenever you were at, so tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was the turning point for me. Because I think for a while it was like I had this, and then I slowly started talking about it, which was so helpful, but I didn't understand it still. I didn't know how to get out of it. It was just this ongoing cycle of insanity of just like I'm doing the same thing, like even though I'm aware of it. And there's a shame cycle that sets in there. There's a level of shame with sexual addiction is off the charts. And so yeah, that was the turning point for me where I actually started having lasting change and sobriety. And then once sobriety sets in, then I can start uprooting the roots of it and start dying. And that is, I think, a lifelong, I want to say joy, but it's like a lifelong process to just start digging up deeper and deeper roots of every area, but definitely sexual addiction too. Yeah. The best part of Celebrate Recovery is just, there's like always a deeper level. Like it's a whole new level of, just understanding the roots or different dynamics in my life. And like this past year has come up with a lot of body image stuff that has been there forever, but I'd never really like picked apart. And then how does that play into sexual addiction? How does that play into intimacy? And like, and so it's been super interesting. Like that's another layer that's there.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
You mentioned body image several times.
Yeah.
And so I want to make sure that I understand what you're talking about. So explain to the listeners what you mean by body image and how's that a struggle?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think for me, I would define it as some sort of my identity being found in my worth. So not just identity, but worth being found in how I look in some way. And so I think that's a little bit different for everyone. For me, I mine kind of started in middle school. But I think what happened was like I started experiencing there was some sort of event or series of events that led me to start believing like, oh, my value and worth is attached here. So if I don't have very high self-esteem, and then my friends make comments or I see that they care about this is of value to the people who I care about, then it becomes, well, I need to care about this. This needs to be another area where I have acceptance. And if it's not, I'm going to do everything in my power to get there. Very destructive, but for very good reasons. And so I started extreme dieting my like junior and senior year of high school, into college. And then it kind of like, it did taper off a little bit, which was helpful. And then last year, it was literally almost about a year ago, I started, I just was like, gosh, I've not been working out. I'm going to get healthier and eat healthier. Like I should just start doing this. And I already had 2 kids. So I was like, okay, let's start tackling this. And it was honestly just a way to get healthy. But what I didn't realize was it touched that wound from middle school that hadn't been healed. And so it just, oh my gosh, I just feel like I got hit with a train with all of the kind of habits and self-esteem and just like my addictive behaviors. Like it came back where I was like extreme dieting again and working out like crazy and not giving myself grace and trying to reach this standard. And then I got into the whole health industry, the quote unquote health industry, where they're like, oh, here are the ways to work out and do things, which is wildly unhealthy and starving ourselves. And that's a whole other conversation. But yeah. And so I've been able to work through that a lot and get healthier, emotionally with that. Not physically. I mean, I am in a healthy state now physically, but being able to have a healthy relationship with food and exercise has been huge.
Well, thank you so much for being so transparent with your struggles and the things you're doing. I think this is really going to help people who aren't used to talking about it. Were there any verses in your recovery or even today that you just cling to? You say, man, this verse is a life verse, or this verse has really helped me in my recovery. Is there any verses like that for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think the verse that sticks out to me a lot just early on is that verse that deacon told me about, like, what can pluck you out of God's hand? And it's nothing. And like, that just spoke to me from such a young age. But I think too, for whatever reason, this is just like a verse I just run to all the time, which is, don't be anxious about anything, but with prayer and supplication, bring your requests to the Lord. And it seems really surface level and a little shaming, like, well, don't be anxious. Why are you anxious? Don't do it. But really what the Lord is saying is like, when you're anxious, here's what you need to do. Like prayer, bring your requests known to me. And what happens is, I mean, this is what happens in therapy. The Lord just kind of like asks us what's going on, and we talk about it and we start processing it and we bring it up. And what we're doing is we're staying curious with ourselves, and we're like, okay, why do I going to this? And then there's a level of, what do I want? Like, bring a request known to the Lord. Like, the Lord is like, what can I do for you? What do we really want? Do we want to get out of this addiction? Because you know what? Addictions do a lot for us, and it works a lot of times to regulate us, and it's not good in the long term, but in momentary, it can feel like, well, this is the solution. And so are we ready to give that up? And so I think that for me, that has been like a verse that has really, I'm often anxious. And so I'm like, okay, I'm anxious. Let me bring this to the Lord. And then of course I talk to people too. It's not just ends there, but that's just really stuck out to me, that verse.
And it gives you peace.
Yes. Yeah.
The peace that transcends all understanding.
Yes. Because usually I feel like seen by the Lord after that. I'm like, okay, I have requested this, I do this. And like, I can feel like usually I'll end up thinking, I feel like this is the Lord speaking to me. Like, it'll remind me of another verse or a different truth and it kind of self-regulates me to where I'm like, okay, yes, the Lord's got this. Like, he's moving, he's doing something in my life. And this is a pathway to peace, you know?
So what's your story, your theme? If you could wrap it up into one sentence and tell someone, hey, this is my message of my life to you, what would that be?
Gosh, I think I would say things are deeper than they seem. be kind to yourself and explore them with curiosity and not judgment.
So if someone is listening and they have, maybe a secret, or maybe they feel like that they have some things that, that they haven't told anyone about, and they hear you being so transparent and they say, wow, I need that. I need to tell someone. I need to talk about this. Anyway, if someone can relate to your story, what would your advice be to them?
Yeah. And so I think just talking about it can start lifting a huge weight, because we think, I heard someone say shame is relational. So even if we're by ourselves being overwhelmed by shame, we're usually thinking about, what if this person knew, or what if what would people think of me? That's the message of shame. And so the more that we talk about it, and we see that people aren't disgusted by us or overwhelmed by, and it has to be a safe person, but I think the more that we do that, it starts ripping out the shame, and it gives us then an ability to start dealing with it and say, okay, maybe I can start being curious with myself and kind.
Julia, thanks so much for sharing your life change story with us. If you are listening today and you would like a little more context to Julia's story, I want to encourage you to listen to episode 15, as that's Andy's story, Julia's husband. It's entitled Secrets, and it's an amazing life change story. Hey, if you are listening today and maybe you have a secret sin, maybe it's a sex addiction, maybe you feel there is no hope for healing or sobriety, maybe you feel there is no way to be free from the secret burden that you've been carrying for such a long time. Well, I've got good news. There is healing in the revealing, and Jesus Christ can change your life just like he did for Julia. However, if nothing changes, nothing changes. See you next time. If you are still listening and you like this podcast, I want to encourage you to listen to previous episodes, because they will help to inspire change in your life. Also, if you like what you hear, please leave a positive review, because it helps to bring this podcast to others. But no matter what, may God bless you, and may God bring positive change to your life.